Moed Katan Daf begins in the middle of a discussion about cutting one's nails while he is a mourner. The Gemara will bring a story about the topic. The Gemara will then get into halachos of cutting one's nails on Chol HaMoed and general halachos of what to do with nail clippings. The Gemara will then refer back to the Mishnah and discuss types of situations in which one is permitted to wash clothing or cloths on Chol HaMoed that are not mentioned in our Mishnah. The Gemara will want to know why not. The Gemara will then the Gemara will bring a new Mishnah, which will teach us the halachos of writing on Chol HaMoed and what type of documents you are allowed to write on Chol HaMoed. The Gemara will discuss them and some more halachos about writing. We'll end up with some other stories about the subject and some related agadata. Now, along the way, the Gemara will throw in some agadata about pare. Okay, so the Gemara begins. We have said that Shmuel holds that you're allowed to cut your nails while one is a mourner. One is allowed to cut his nails while he is a mourner. The Gemara says there was an incident that happened with Shmuel and his brother Pinchas. Pinchas was in Avelis. He had lost a close relative, and Shmuel, his brother, who held that it's permitted to cut nails during the morning, he came to be Menachem Avel. He came to console him. So he saw that his nails were very long. So he said to him, "Why don't you cut your nails?" So he said, "If it was you who had lost a relative and you were in mourning, would you be so cavalier about the halachos of nail cutting during the Chol HaMoed?" Well, having said that, wouldn't you know it, but shortly afterwards, Shmuel did lose a close relative, and he was in mourning, and Pinchas came to visit him to be Menachem Avel to him. So Shmuel cut his nails in front of his face and threw the nails at him, and he said, "You have to be careful with what you say. Don't you know that brisk krusa alas v'sayim, when you say something, it can cause it to happen. There's a covenant on the lips." And he kind of blamed him for the fact that he had said, if you were a mourner, and he himself had become a mourner because of that. He also showed that, yes, he did cut his nails, and he held that way lahalacha. Now, the Gemara goes into the concept of brisk krusa al sosayim. You shouldn't say things because it could cause it to happen. The Gemara says that Rav Yochanan said, where do we see the idea of brisk krusa al sosayim? The Gemara says when Avram went to do the Akedah, he said to his servants, Shulachem payim echamar, you stay here with the donkey, v'ani v'anar nelcha adkai, I and the boy, meaning Yitzchak, will continue, v'neshtachavet will bel v'neshuv alechem, we will return to you. Now Avram knew that they weren't going to return to him because Yitzchak was going to stay by, and Yitzchak was about to be brought as a carbon olah. But things worked out, and he did bring him back. So the fact that he said that was an unknown prophecy, and it possibly had an effect on the fact that they did return. Now, going to the halachos of cutting the nails on Chol HaMoed, the Gemara says that there was a thought that when Shmuel said it's permitted, he was only referring to fingernails, not toenails, due to the fact that fingernails are visible, and therefore they are more of a problem. They're more interfering, and they give one a disheveled appearance. But the Gemara says that Ravanan Bar Tachlifa said that I heard clearly from Shmuel, even the toenails one is allowed to cut. It's not a problem, even while he is a mourner. Now, are you allowed to cut them normally with a pair of clippers? So Gemara quotes Rav Chia Bar Ashi named Rav, who says you're not allowed to use clippers. Rav Shaman Bar Abba says I was once with Rav Yochanan in the Beis Medrash and on Chol HaMoed, and he cut his nails with his teeth. He bit them off and he threw them. So you see from there three halachas. First of all, you see that it's permitted to cut nails on Chol HaMoed, which is a similar halacha to Avelis, but here we're discussing Chol HaMoed. You also see that you're allowed to bite nails. It's not considered disgusting. And the third thing we see is that you're allowed to just throw them. You don't have to dispose of them carefully. The Gemara quotes a brisa that says that's not true. The brisa says that there are three levels of dealing with nail clippings. One who puts them in the ground, he buries them, that's tzaddik. Somebody who burns them is a chassid. Somebody who just throws them around, that's a Rasha. So how could Rav Yochanan just throw his? That's what the Rasha does. So Gemara says is the reason that you're afraid to throw them, the reason that you're a Rasha if you throw them is because a pregnant woman may step on them and they have a Ruach Hara, which will cause her to miscarry. However, Rav Yochanan was in the Beis Medrash. Women don't walk around the Beis Medrash, and therefore it's not likely to happen. If they get swept out of the Beis Medrash, then there's no concern, because once they're moved from the place in which they originally fell, there is no longer a ruach hara on them, and is not going to cause her to miscarry if she steps on them. Okay, the Gemara continues and says that a pair of Talmidei Chachamim came to ask a shaila from Rebbe. It's not clear who's quoting this. One version is that it's Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav. Another is that it's Mer Zutra quoting a brisa. But either way, this pair of Talmidei Chachamim came to ask Rebbe, and they asked, "You're allowed to cut nails on Chol Hamoed?" He said that it's permitted. The Gemara says that had they asked him about trimming the mustache, he would have said that that's permitted as well. The Gemara says that Shmuel says that they did ask him about trimming the mustache, and he did say that that is permitted. Now the Gemara quotes Avitol the Safra, Avitol the Sefer, the scribe, says in the name of Rav, you're allowed to trim the mustache from corner of the mouth to corner of the mouth all the way across. And Rabbi Ami says that's only if the mustache is too long and it's interfering with your eating or drinking. Nachum Bar Yitzchak says, my mustache is always a problem. It always interferes because I'm an anina. I'm very finicky about my facial hair, and therefore it's a problem for me no matter how long it is, and I'm always allowed to trim it. Now then we'll quote some other things from Avitol the Sefer, the name of Rab. First of all, he says that Paroi, who was in Mitzrayim at the time of the Yitzias Mitzrayim, at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, he was 1 amma tall, his beard was an amma long, his male organ was an amma and a half. Now this is meant to be understood aggadically. The fact that he was an amma tall is not literal. It's meant to mean that he was of very lowly stature, that his beard was the same length, means that he was just as vain as he was existing, and the fact that his organ was a amma and a half means that he was more consumed by taiva than his actual personality had strength. Okay, now the Gemara says further, he was also an amgushi. An amgushi means either a sorcerer or a heretic. The Gemara says that's learned from the fact that it says that Hashem told Moshe to go speak to him at the river. Either he went out there to do sorcery, or he went out there to relieve himself because he was telling people that he was a god. According to Rashi, he went there every morning to show that he created the river, which is what he believed about himself. Now, what we said about his size fulfills the pasuk v'shefel anashim yakim aleh, and I will raise upon you a short individual that who was causing us all our trouble in Mitzrayim. Okay. Now the Gemara refers back to the halacha of washing clothing on Chol Hamoed. The Gemara was going to bring two more things that are permitted to be washed, or two more circumstances in which one is permitted to wash that are not in the Mishnah. So Rav Asi says, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, if you only have one cloak, if you only have one shirt, one garment, you're allowed to wash it, because it's not your fault that you didn't wash it before Chol Hamoed, because even if you did wash before Chol Hamoed, it got dirty again, therefore you're allowed to wash it on Chol Hamoed. Now Rabbi Yirmiyah asks, why doesn't it say it in the Mishnah? It lists other things, like somebody comes from Medinas Hayam, who returns from travels. That implies that this is not true. The Mishnah says, no, the Mishnah was only referring to somebody who has multiple cloaks. Now one of them got dirty. These are the heter. But somebody who has one cloak, that's not the type of halacha that the Mishnah was discussing, that you are allowed to do. Now the second halacha is to Yitzchak bar Yaakov bar Yuri, the name of Rav Yochanan again, who says that you're allowed to wash anything made of pishtan, linen, cloth, towels, clothing. You're allowed to wash those things, and the reason is because they're easy to wash, and therefore there's no problem of tircha on Chol Hamoed. So Mara asks a question. The Mishnah says that you're allowed to wash towels or cloths that are used for hand towels, such as handkerchiefs, towels that are used by the barbers, and towels that are used for the bath. So those are all made from linen, and it clearly shows that only these things are allowed to be used, and the fact that it's made from linen is not a broad heter to use any cloth. So my answer is that here these towels are listed because although they're usually made from linen, they're sometimes not made from linen, and it's coming to tell you that even if they are not made from linen, they're made out of wool, which you would not be allowed to wash other cloths, you would be allowed to wash these. However, anything which is made of linen, generally, no matter what type of cloth or clothing it is, you are allowed to wash. The Gemara has a testimony from Bar Hadaya. He says, I saw myself people in the Sea of Tiberia, the Yam Tiberia, that's the Kinneret, they were taking wash basins full of linen clothing out to it to wash it on Chol Hamoed. So you see that you're allowed to do it. So where I ask, it's not necessarily because people are doing it, does that mean that you're allowed to? The fact that they did it does not mean that the Chachamim agree that it was permitted for them to do that. Okay, now we get to our next Mishnah. Mishnah discusses which types of things you are allowed to write on Chol Hamoed. Now, writing is generally something that's considered a skill and not malacha. It's an umnis, it's a chachma, and a malacha. But those types of things, special skilled activities, those are forbidden on Chol Hamoed as well. So the Gemara says that the exceptions are if you have a shtar, a document or a record of some sort that you need to write in order to prevent a loss. So here's a list of things that need to be written immediately to prevent a loss. Now these might be because you want to take a record of something before the guy changes his mind, and the others might be where you need a beis din and you only have a beis din now in Chol Hamoed, you may not have one after Chol Hamoed, that's why you have to record it. So on the list are, number one, a kiddushin shtar. You can marry a woman, that is, you can get engaged. Kiddushin in the times of Chazal was not a wedding, it was only an engagement, but it had a force to it. So you could do that by writing a shtar. There's a shtar kiddushin, so you could write that. You're also allowed to write a get, that is a shtar of divorce. That could cause a loss as well. If you might be referring to a case where a husband is leaving and he gives his wife a conditional divorce. Just in case it doesn't come back, she should be divorced in advance, so she shouldn't fall to Ibam. That's something which you have to do now because he's leaving. Another thing you're allowed to write is a receipt. That is, if you pay up a loan, you get a receipt to prove that you paid it. That could incur a loss. If you can't prove that you paid it, you may be asked to collect again. Another thing is a will. That's someone who is very ill and he gives over property to someone else. You have to record that. It counts as if it's his already, because we say that the word of a shchivma, the word of a sick person on his deathbed, actually transfers possession, but you need a record of it. The next thing is a document that records a gift given from one person to another. Require a record of that as well. Next is a prosbul. That's where someone who is owed money on Shemitah transfers the power to collect to a beis din, because he won't be able to collect himself at the end of Shemitah. He may not have a beis din after Chol Hamoed around, and therefore he'll incur a loss. Next is a letter of evaluation, where a property was evaluated by the court, showing how much it is. Again, there may not be a court around after Chol Hamoed. Another one is a letter where somebody accepts upon himself to support his wife's daughter. He may change his mind if you don't record that. Then you have a certificate of chalitza, where someone did chalitza to prove that they are married, or mian, where somebody withdraws from a marriage. Under certain circumstances, that's allowed without a divorce. Then you could have a shtar where the inheritance is divided up amongst the inheritors, and who gets what. That has to be recorded as well. Next is a court decision, has to be written up. And the last is a letter from the government, which shows what the government wants you to do. That has to be recorded as well. Okay, now the Gemara begins. The Gemara says, you see from this Mishnah that you're allowed to marry a woman on Chol Hamoed. So Shmuel says you're allowed to get married on Chol Hamoed. It's not a problem of Kinyan. Because if you don't marry her now, then somebody else may grab her first. Now Shmuel didn't say Nisuin, Shmuel was talking about Kiddushin. You're allowed to be Mekadesh, allowed to get engaged to make sure that nobody else marries her before you. Now I want to say that our Mishnah seems to support that, because our Mishnah says that you're allowed to write a shtar kiddushin. So if you're writing a shtar kiddushin, obviously you're marrying her now. So the Gemara says shtar kiddushin here doesn't necessarily mean the document that makes the kiddushin. It could just mean a record of the decisions as to who's paying for what between the sides, and that's what we're discussing here. The Gemara says like Rav Gidol, because Rav Gidol said, you write down how much am I giving your son, how much are you giving my daughter, and that's a record, and when they agree, then that's it, it's finalized, and they're obligated to give what they wrote in the thing. So you see that gifts like that, or accepted obligations like that, take effect by just the speech, and the written record is to show what happened. Okay, the Gemara wants to try to bring another proof from somewhere else that Shmuel's halacha is correct, that you're allowed to get engaged on Chol Hamoed. So the Gemara says that we have halacha, you're not allowed to do nisuin on Chol Hamoed. There's a Mishnah earlier in the Masechta which we saw, you're not allowed to make a wedding on Chol Hamoed, you're not allowed to marry a psula, you're not a woman who's never married before, you're not allowed to marry a widow, you're not allowed to do yibum. All these things create joy. You have halacha ve'in ma'avin simcha b'simcha, you cannot do one simcha on Yom Tov, which is a simcha in and of itself. You're going to lose out on the simcha altogether. So you see clearly you're not allowed to do a wedding, but you are allowed to get engaged. That is the implication. Gemara says no, you're really not allowed to get engaged either. If so, why does it only talk about a wedding? Because a wedding is a bigger chiddush. You may think that a wedding is a mitzvah, because now I can populate the world. Therefore, it comes to say even a wedding, which is a mitzvah, you're not allowed to do. Kiddushin, which itself is not a mitzvah, that certainly you're not allowed to do. All right, now the Gemara has a proof from a brisa. The brisa is brought by none other than the yeshiva of Shmuel, who says you're allowed to get engaged, but you're not allowed to get married. You're allowed to do kiddushin, that is, you're not allowed to do erusin, you're not allowed to do nesuin, you're not allowed to do chuppah on Chol Moed, and you're also not allowed to make a suda. You're not allowed to make a big vart, an engagement celebration. You can't do yibum, and all these things are because of ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. Now the Gemara questions, how could Shmuel say that somebody else might marry her first? It's not possible for someone else to marry her first. We know that Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel himself that on each day a voice comes out of Shemayim and decrees this woman is to marry this man. The daughter of this is for this one. So you see you have a specific designated woman who's meant to be your wife. How is there concern that somebody else is going to get to her first and marry her first? It's not possible. She's supposed to be for you. The Baskel said so. So Gemara answers, somebody could change that decree, well, not change it, someone could override that decree with his tefillah. He could, by being mispal, he could ask Hashem to have a certain woman marry him, and then she will, because of the tefillah that he said. But that would be overriding this decree. Now the Gemara explains that it's not a good thing to do. The Gemara quotes a story where Rava heard somebody being mispal, that this woman should agree to marry me. So Rava said, do not daven for that, because if she's fitting for you, she's going to agree without you having to say tefillah. And if she's not fitting to you, you're going to end up hating her if you marry her. If you could be mispal that she should agree, and she will agree, even though she's not the right one for you, and if you marry the wrong person, it's going to be a disaster. Now the Gemara says that later he went and he did marry her, and Rava then heard him being mispal again. Hashem, please make either she should die or I should die, apparently because he couldn't stand the marriage anymore and he wanted to get out of it. So Rava said, I told you, you should not be mispal for things like this because it's only going to make problems. It was a direct fulfillment of Rava's prediction. Okay, now the Gemara gets deeper into the topic of the fact that a marriage is predetermined by Shomayim, by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Gemara quotes Rav in the name of Reuven ben Itzrabili, says that there are sources in Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, Me Hashem Ish Leish, that is from Hashem who decides which woman is for which man and which man is for which woman. From Torah, like it says, Vayan Lavan and Besuel Vayomu Me Hashem Yatzahad Davar, referring to the shidduch between Yitzchak and Rivka. Lavan and Besuel said, Hashem decided this one. Now in Nevi'im we have the marriage of Shimshon to a Pelishti woman, to Delilah, and his father and mother try to talk him out of it, but the pasuk says, they didn't know that it was from Hashem. And in Ksuvim, you have a pasuk in Mishlei that says, Bayis v'hon nachlas avos, house and wealth you can inherit, me Hashem, isha, maskalas, but to be merit to marry an intelligent woman, that comes only from Hashem. Now, Reuven, the son of Itzrabili, had another Agadic statement, which Rav quotes. Some say it was in a brisa, and that is that he says that no one is ever suspected of anything unless he's guilty of it in some way. Either he did it, or he did part of it, or he thought of doing it, he was maharer, he planned on doing it, or he wished he could do it, or he saw somebody else do it and was happy. But he's somehow guilty to that. So I think Gemara asks, we find a number of situations where somebody suspected of things which he definitely didn't have any connection to in any way at all. For example, first of all, Klal Yisrael suspected Hashem of doing things that were not appropriate. Like it says, V'yachbu b'nei Yisrael dvar mashalochein al Hashem Elokeim. He suspected Hashem. That was, they had the tainas on Hashem. Obviously Hashem never did anything wrong, it's impossible. Versus they didn't really think that Hashem was guilty of anything, they just were trying to anger HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but in their hearts they knew the truth. The Gemara says, okay, well there was a situation where Moshe was suspected of things. It says that Korach and his camp accused Moshe of inappropriate behavior, and each man formally warned his wife not to be alone with him, with Moshe. So they suspected Moshe of inappropriate behavior. That was obviously not true, and Moshe was above any of the things, any of the partial guilt that is implied here. Gemara says they as well, they knew that it wasn't true. They were just trying to make trouble, and they hated him, and that's why they did all these things. They pretended they suspected him, didn't actually suspect him. The Gemara says, okay, but we have another brisa. The brisa says that Rav Yossi said, I would like to be amongst those people who are suspected of something which he did not do. And Rav Papa commented on that, and he said, I was once suspected of something which I did not do. So again, these tzaddikim, certainly they are saying, when they didn't do, they mean they didn't do it at any level. So Gemara says that's not a problem. There's two types of rumors. One is a rumor that stops, one is a rumor that doesn't stop. A rumor that stops is not a real, this doesn't apply. That doesn't show that he's guilty of it. If it stops and it fades away, then it's not what Ruvain Itztrabili said does not apply. Gemara says, what do you call a rumor that stops? Gemara says it's called a rumor that stops if it doesn't last a day and a half without break. It's got to go on for a day and a half without any interruption. If it stopped in the middle, then it doesn't count. Now, if it stopped, though, in the middle because the rumor mongers were afraid of retribution, that doesn't count as having stopped. And if it springs up again somewhere else with the same force as before, then it doesn't count as having stopped. And if the rumor altogether is on a person who has known enemies that are looking to start up with him, then that doesn't count as a rumor, and therefore there's no issue.